I'm Raphael, I'm the Dean of the Business School. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the third annual Asper lecture on entrepreneurship. And we are very pleased to have with us tonight Professor Alfonso Gambardella from Bocconi and MIT. This is the third lecture in this series, and as we always do, we're going to start with greetings from Winnipeg, Manitoba, where Gail Asper, who is the funding benefactor of the Asper Center for Entrepreneurship, lives. But she's actually not going to be the one who's going to speak to us tonight. It's rather Mo Levy, who's the, let's see if I get this right, Executive Director of the Asper Foundation. Yes. So. Hello. You're on. So there we are. I don't know if what can you see from this camera, but it's the Senate Hall, and it's the third Asper lecture, and the speaker is Professor Alfonso Gambardella from Bocconi and MIT.
Okay. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Professor Yishai, Professor Gambardella, Professor Nero. Welcome to the lecture tonight. Can you see behind me over here?
Yes. Yes.
Anyways, if you can, or if you can,
we can.
You'll see snow coming down. So I don't want you to let you react. I'm calling you from Canada, from Winnipeg, Canada. Honestly, we thought that global warming was going to really be great for us. It was like 4 or 5 degrees. Today it's snowing like crazy, and it's going to go down to -12. So if you want to live vicariously for a great winter, look behind me. Anyways, I just wanted to welcome you all to the Asper Center for Entrepreneurship. We hope you have a great lecture today. When Izzy Asper set up the center at the University, it was to bring in experts like what you're going to be having today. We believe that people like Professor Gambardella will give you the insights that you need as you focus on, markets and technology. I don't have to tell you this lecture is very timely. When you look at Standard & Poor's, the 4 or 5 technology companies today make such a huge chunk of the U.S. economy. And it's only going to get, of course, more and more, it's going to increase the much, of course, valued and talked about the startup nation. I don't have to tell you about that. I think it's perhaps overdone. But regardless, your topic today is very, very timely. And I know that Professor Gambardella is going to give you some fantastic insight. So, again, my thanks to Professor Yishai and Nero for always giving you cutting-edge information on what's going on in the business world today. So have a great lecture, have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to go on and try out that new parka that I just bought. So a parka, by the way, is a jacket that's for 40 below. Anyway, bye everyone, and have a great lecture.
Thanks, Mo. I'm Nero Hashai. I'm head of the Asper Center of Entrepreneurship, and among our various activities, we have this annual lecture where this is the third one. Last year we had here Professor Paul Gompers with us, and 2 years ago we had Professor Raphael and Morten Benetson. And this year we are very happy to have with us Professor Alfonso Gambardella, who is a professor of corporate management at Bocconi. Professor Gambardella earned his PhD in economics at Stanford in 1991. And I think ever since he's been one of the most prolific writers in subjects like technology, innovation, industry structures, like all the time playing between the fields or the classic fields of economics and strategy. Has published in all the leading journals in economics and certainly in strategy like organization science and management science and strategic management journal and many other that I research policy that I won't list now. But one of the most famous contributions of Professor Gambardella is his book Markets for Technology, which is also part of his topic for today. This book was written together with Professors Ashish Arora and Andrea Fosfuri, and I think has offered important insights that has shaped a lot of research and debates, both in the academia and the business world, about why do we see markets for technology and what's driving all that. Certainly, as Mo just mentioned, this is a very timely issue for Israeli companies that many of them are coming up with novel technology that in one way or another is then put to the market, so to speak. In addition to his research work, Professor Gambardella is also very active. He's an associate, he's an editor actually, a co-editor of the Strategic Management Journal, sits on the boards of the Academy Management Journal, Academy Management Review, Industrial Corporate Change, Research Policy. Currently this year he's visiting MIT, so he made a very long way. He was in China, came back to Boston and then came to us, and we believe that we are very fortunate to have him with us. So I can go on and on, but probably you came here to hear Professor Gambardella and not me, so Alfonso, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Niron, for this presentation. So I think I have a mic. You can hear me even if I walk downstairs, right? Okay, so that would be much better. So thank you very much for this invitation to the university, to the Asper Foundation, and to you people who had the occasion to come here. It's really a pleasure for me to be here for many reasons. I mean, one reason is because, as you could hear, I'm getting into a slightly warmer climate, and this is never a bad thing, especially for me. I come from the south of Italy, so I'm more used to this kind of climate than the climate that we have in Boston, let alone in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so that's good. It's interesting that Raphael gave this lecture 2 years ago. I was with Raph in China just last week, so as you can see, the world is small. We all come from the same background. And most importantly, I mean, I think that I am in one of the most wonderful cities of the world. I just had an exchange with a good friend of mine and who is from Jerusalem, and he actually mentioned go here and there, and then so I actually showed him that I went to see what he was suggesting, and he said, that's great, this is the best city of the world, you did exactly the right thing. So thank you for inviting me in this great place. So what I would like to talk about is these markets for technology. Why do we see them? Why don't we see more of them? And why should we care? This is, as Niron was suggesting, it's really part of a lifelong time attempt to understand a phenomenon. I started to work on these issues when I was a graduate student, and I will show it to you. And interestingly, I think the issue has become more and more important over time, in spite of the fact that I am probably less and less competent on the subject. It's interestingly become increasingly relevant for many reasons that I would like to discuss with you tonight. Let me give you just a little agenda of what I would like to talk about, and as agreed upon, I'll try really to stay within 45-50 minutes at the most, and then get any questions that you would like to raise on the topic. So I'd like to give you some background. In essence, I will try to cover 2,000 years in 5 minutes. But you know, now on the internet, you see a lot of those stuffs, not 2,000 years in 5-second videos. I'm doing something very similar, but not with videos, just with a couple of slides. And then I would like to deep into the issue. So why do we see these technology markets? Something that for people of your generation may seem quite obvious, but for people of my generation is not obvious at all. This is like when my son, we had a problem with our laptop like 2 years ago, and I said, I cannot get on the internet. And he said, so what is a laptop useful for? I said, well, I used to use laptops that were not connected to internet for ages. So this is pretty much the same thing. Markets for technology may seem obvious for people of the new generation. They are not obvious for people of previous generation, but you will see that I think there are insights that are relevant for many reasons, even for the new generation. So we'll discuss, based on this experience, what are the factors affecting the rise of these markets, and I'll discuss the factors that you see there. But we will also discuss why we see limitations to the rise of these markets, and finally, why the issue is important. Why should we care? Why is this a very important issue? As a conclusion, I think one of the greatest pleasures of coming here is that I finally had the incentive to read Startup Nation, the book. And I really said, I mean, this is one of the books, and you'll forgive me for this, I will not cite the economist, but there's a very famous economist, a Nobel Prize winner, who told me this once. He said, my work is the most cited work compared to how many people actually read my book. And I have to say that my feeling is that Startup Nation, at least I felt, it's a highly cited compared to the number of people who actually read it from word one to the last one. Of course, I'm not probably talking about this room. So I said, I want to be part of the small set of people who could actually say, I read it throughout. And I did it. And so I want, in my conclusions, really bring up some links between this literature, Startup Nation, and beyond. And this is especially in the spirit of raising questions and issues and probably some topics for speculation. OK, so let me start. Background. So what is the background? What is surprising for me and probably less surprising for the new generation? That we have seen the rise of markets everywhere. I can easily say markets really started in my country. In the Renaissance period in Italy, you first see the rise of markets. And why do you see the rise of markets in Italy? You see the rise of markets in Italy for an obvious reason, because Italy was very politically fragmented. Compare it to China. It was very fragmented. So if someone produced something, at some point, the production expanded. They wanted to expand their market. But unfortunately, expansion of the market meant to step on the toes of the duke in the nearby area. And there were two options at that point. Either you do war, which was a possibility, and sometimes this was the option that was exercised. But on many other occasions, the idea was, let's bargain. Let's talk. So you are in Parma, you do the ham. I am in Florence, I do the paintings. Why don't we exchange a couple of paintings for 2 pounds of ham, and so on and so forth. And so markets started in Italy. Since then, the 1500s, you have seen the rise of markets everywhere, throughout Europe, throughout the world. Interestingly, these have been markets of physical products. You never saw markets of ideas, markets of intangibles, markets for technology. As a matter of fact, knowledge was exchanged for more than 2 millennia, but not through the market. It was exchanged to a different system, the scientific system, which is basically I produce ideas, I publish my ideas, typically even 2,000 years ago, or at least I explain my ideas to people, and this is the way I diffuse. And how do I live? How can I eat and live? Well, most simply because there were patrons. The Greek philosophers had patrons. The Medici family in Florence were the patrons of Galileo. So science was supported not by the market, but by patrons. And that was the way knowledge was diffused. And this was true for two millennia, really. The first time in which you see people making a living out of selling technology was really in the US in the 19th century. In the US in the 19th century, you start seeing professional inventors. People who say, I am smart. I can invent something, and I can sell my invention. Then the 20th century come in, and all this disappears. We will see the inventors get employed by large corporations, and we come back to the patron system. I give you a salary, and you invent, and whatever you do with your invention, any proceeds from your invention is mine. Mine being the shareholders, the company. In the 1990s, we see back the professional inventors in a completely different forms that you probably are aware of, but it's again, it's the 19th century coming back. And today, we don't know. Let's see. So, let me start 4 slides for the previous 4 bullet points, just to set you up, okay? Just for the background of this, so that you know what we are talking about in this history. 1850-1990, the golden age of the professional inventors. Edison, Stanley, Sperry, Westinghouse, Thomson, you name them. What were these people doing? They were sitting in their house, they were inventing, they were producing inventions, they were patenting their inventions, and they used not to create a company with their inventions, they would use to go with their patents to some other companies, and they used to tell them, look, this is my invention, why don't you buy my patent? Interestingly, in the US, not in the UK, which was the other nation in which this could have happened, this was largely a US phenomenon. And I cannot refrain myself from stating another big inventor was actually back in the 19th century was Meucci, an Italian, who actually invented the telephone, and he made a mistake. This is the Italian version of the problem, but I think it's correct. He made a mistake to go to the Bell Labs and said, look, I have this great invention. I can take this device and communicate to someone in the other room. And they said, well, it's not that interesting. And then 10 years later, a patent came with the name of Bell, and AT&T made a fortune out of this. In any case, this is of course, the Italian version of the story, but it's part of this idea, okay? Meucci did not think of creating a company. He just thought of going to a company to sell his idea. Then what you have in the 20th century, for many reasons. Scientists and engineers get employed in large corporations. Large corporations say, this is very important. We cannot leave this to the vagaries of these entrepreneurs, of these professional inventors. Who are they in any case? We need to hire them. We need to sit them in our labs so that they can do this systematically. It's too fickle. Once in a while they come back, they give us ideas and so on and so on. No, we want this systematically. And as you can see, if I can point this, the share of patents, this is 1870, 90, 1910, share of patents to unrelated individuals drops. Share of patents to company increases. Share of patents to groups, including patentee, decreases. Share of assignment with patentee, I cannot read it. With patentee stake in assignee declines. So what do you see? Increasingly, the invention process shifts from the professional inventors, from the entrepreneurs, the individuals, to the large corporations. And what do you see? This picture says scientists and engineers in industrial research labs in the US, manufacturing firms per 1,000. And as you can see, big rise, 1921, 27, 33, 1940, big rise of the share of engineers and scientists employed by corporations. So these people left their houses, left their labs, and became salaried employees. So now the era of these heroes disappears. They all become clogs of a much larger machine. Interestingly, changes occurs again in the 1990s. This is a long-term view of the blue one. And the blue one is the worldwide receipts from licensing royalty rates. So this is the amount of money produced worldwide year by year from licenses. What are licenses? Technology, just sale of technologies, sale of the use of technology. As you can see, 20th century, this is very flat. It starts rising in the 80s. This is more or less when I was doing my PhD thesis. And then 1990s, you see this incredible climb. So the 1990s are the period in which, again, you observe a lot of sales of technology by people independently of firms. So there is now trade in technology again. And as a matter of fact, the beginning of the 2000s sees the explosion of people talking about this. Apart from our book, the most important probably evidence is this. The Economist in 2005 comes with a special issue called Markets for Ideas. So in which they kind of put the stamp on the story. They say, look, I mean, there is this big flourishing market for technology that it's actually rising. Technology is disembodied from products. People actually sell the idea, the patent, rather than incorporating the patent into the technology. And what do you see during the year 2000? This is interesting. This is very recent data from Stu Graham, who is the head of the patent office. He shows that, you see, this is 1980. So this is the other graph I'm showing you. This is pretty much the recorded transactions. This is number of transactions in patents. How many patents are transacted, are offered from one party to another party. You see some rise. Forget about a drop here, which is simply the lack of data for the very latest periods. You can go up to 2010. So what do you see is that this is the continuation of the curve that I showed you earlier, till you become 2005, 2010, and you see that things are kind of phasing out, kind of tapering off here. Okay? This is still a question mark. But as you can see, the big rise that we observed since the 1990s seem to have come to an end. Okay? It's not clear. It's only 5 years, but it's clearly a deceleration in the number of patents that are being traded. So what is the bottom line here? What did I show you in this short period of time? No trade, lots of exchange of knowledge, always, for 2,000 years. But in the 19th century, second part of the 19th century, people sell knowledge for money. 20th century, this is no longer the case. Knowledge becomes a mass production story. R&D labs in large corporations in which the inventors is paid a salary, and whatever risk proceeds from the invention actually go to the company. 1990, big rise again, and 2005, we see some tapering off or something like that. So what I would like to do now, after giving this background, is try to dig a little bit more into these issues. So the first issue, it's really, why do we see them? Why do we see technology markets? What made it possible to create the sale of technology irrespective of the products? There are actually 4 reasons. One is cognitive, and we'll see what I mean in a second. The second one is intellectual property. The third one is the so-called licensing dilemma. It's more strategy. Why do I sell technology and create competitors? And the fourth one is what is the size of the market for a technology? When we think about cars, about goods, we have a clear idea. The number of cars sold, the number of customers willing to buy a car makes the size of the market. We will see that in the case of technology, issues are a little bit more subtle. It's not that obvious that the size of the market is related to the number of people who want to buy the technology, or at least we need to understand what it means. Nature of knowledge. You cannot sell technology unless you know what you're talking about. For many years, technology was not codified. Technology was something that was just made out of the experience of people. And so it was very hard to define what is the object of technology. The 1990s saw the rise of life sciences, engineering sciences, software, which made it much, much easier to understand what is a technology. I'm giving you 2 examples here. This is the molecule of Prozac, an antidepressant. okay? In chemical and pharmaceuticals, when you develop a drug, you develop a compound. Highly codified science tells you this is the molecule. Now, to make this into a drug product, you need 20 years, 15 years of clinical trials. And that's the downstream development capabilities. Then there is the marketing and so on and so forth. But you see, the basic idea is here. What did the life sciences do? The life sciences gave us the tools to build a lot of these molecules. In the past, many of these molecules could actually come from trial and error. Let me try drugs. Let me try compounds and see which one is actually developed. Well, with the life sciences, you start designing the structures, and therefore you can sell the structures. The other thing is software. This is an algorithm for a software security product, probably by Check Point, an Israeli company. And what happens with software is exactly that. You can codify. Think about the flying simulations for the flying of an airplane. In the past, how do you check how an airplane works? You put it into wind tunnels and check. Now, you can simulate on software and then sell the simulator, which is basically the structure of the idea of how you test about airplanes. So the rise in the scientific engineering sciences made it possible to codify knowledge and to sell it. Second, intellectual property rights. The rise of capitalism was possible because the famous law of enclosures. In Britain, you enclose a terrain, you become the owner of the land, and you can trade it. Well, same for technology. The way you can trade technology is because there is an intellectual property in it. Someone has to be the owner of this and be able to sell it. Third reason, from a strategy point of view, what is the problem with technology? Suppose that I develop a technology, like a new software, for my applications. As a strategy company, when firms license technology that they use to produce a product, they get a revenue from licensing the technology. But because I license the technology, I also create a competitor. So if I license a technology to some company and I'm producing the downstream product, I'm also creating a competitor. So the question is, and by creating a competitor, I create a dissipation of my profits in the downstream market. So the question is, when do you actually sell the technology as opposed to the product? Well, when the revenue from licensing is greater than the profit dissipation effect. When you earn more from licensing, then you lose from the creation of a new competitor. But then the question becomes, when is revenue from licensing greater than this profit dissipation effect? And we can think of 4 reasons that depend on competition, if you are a small firm, if products are homogeneous, and if you can appropriate the revenue from licensing. Let me just give you the case of the small firms. All the other cases are more elaborate ones. Let me give you the case for small firms. We know, as a fact, that large firms do not license their technologies. Small firms do. So on average, we'll even show you some data. If you are a large firm and you have a great technology and you are not using that technology because you don't want to use that technology now, you do not license it. If you are a small firm, on many occasions, you were born to sell that technology. And why is that? Precisely for this reason. If you are a small firm with a large market, by selling the technology, you create a competitor which is going to eat a large share of your large market. If you are a small firm, in the extreme case, you do not have a product market, or very tiny. How much can a competitor eat up of your downstream market? Therefore, what is the bottom line here? There is a natural tendency for small firms to earn more by licensing the technology than by losing profits because they create a competitor. The fourth reason for the rise of technology markets is probably the most fascinating one. And this is where we really have a different perspective when we think about technologies as goods as opposed to products. When you think about products, a product is a specific application. It's a car. It's a computer. It has one application. Interestingly, when you think of technologies, technologies make markets by connecting together the most disparate technologies, the most disparate product industries. So typically, whilst the product, a personal product, a computer, is useful for a particular market, a technology can be used for many different markets, can expand horizontally across different applications. And this general purpose nature of the technology, it's what makes the size of the market in this case. This is the classical example, semiconductors. Think about semiconductors. How many disparate applications semiconductors had? And there are many companies with this characteristic. The companies that sell technologies typically do not think of one application sector. They think of many application sectors. In most of the cases, these companies make money because they understand how many different sectors they can tap to sell their technologies. Just to give you, let me give you this example. This is the most beautiful one. Then I have a more elaborate example. Cambridge Display Technology. It's a company that developed light-emitting polymers, and this is plastics that make lights. They started with application in semiconductors, but then they realized, hey, this is great for creating dolls. Think about young girls, how much they would love to have a doll that flashes up. And so the second application is first application is semiconductors, second application, toys. Third application, and fourth application, many other industries. So you see, when you start selling a technology, the mindset of the entrepreneur is completely different. It's not, how many semiconductors can I sell? Let me go and tap the semiconductor firms. Let me go with my marketing guys to sell how many semiconductors I could. The mindset is different. The mindset is, I sell semiconductors. What else could this be used for? Toys. And this is the way suppliers of technology make the size of the market. This is a dedicated technology. What is a dedicated technology? It's a technology dedicated to a particular application. You are here, the supplier, and you probably have to deal with this large manufacturer who makes anything he or she can about you. So he is really the source of bargaining power. If you have a GPT, this is you, and then you know, okay, I can do semiconductors, I can do toys, I can do something else, and so on and so on. So you make rent horizontally, you see, by expanding the number of uses. So let me show you some of these cases. This is just 2 slides on this case. This is Echelon. This is just 2 slides just to fix this point of how companies that sell technology instead of products think. This is a company called Echelon. This company, in the 1980s, this company was working in the sector of automated controllers. These are controllers that check several automated activities. This market was dominated by companies in very different vertical markets. So you could use controllers for buildings, for manufacturing, for transportation, for utilities. These were the 4 main markets. So Echelon said, but look, all these controls are based on the same idea. The idea of creating automation in the way you check how these machines work. So they came up with this technology called Loanworks, which was a platform that connects all the controls, and it's a general purpose technology in the sense that it can be used with downstream adaptation to products in any of these markets. So what Echelon did, they transformed the industry from an industry in which there were 4 separate markets: buildings, manufacturing, transportation, and utilities. Each of them served by dedicated technologies, most likely produced by the users. So it was the companies creating, say, the heat equipment of the buildings that were vertically integrated and producing the controls. Similarly here, it was the manufacturers of cars that were producing the controls. Similarly here, the manufacturing industries were producing their own controls. They transformed the industry into something which there was a general purpose technologies, and they were selling the technology to all these different buyers. So they were making money by expanding the number of uses, by going horizontally rather than vertically. How could they do it? Not by entering into manufacturing, not by doing like their predecessors, not by becoming producers of building equipment, producers of manufacturing equipment, producers of cars. They realized that they could make money by selling licenses. Essentially by telling these people, I'll give you the technologies with a series of tools so that you can customize the technology to your own use. It's a complete change in the strategic approach. Let me give you another example. This is an example that should be very familiar to the Israeli economy. Software security, which is an industry dominated in large part by Israeli companies. Software security is an industry that produces products, antivirus, security keys, many others, firewall, now very sophisticated security systems. The key technology is a crypto algorithm, which is embodied in the product. This is my random generating number bank account. Essentially, in order to tap into my bank account, there is this random generating number associated with an account. This is a software security product based on an algorithm. Okay, so this is the industry. What are the characteristics of this industry? This industry features both dedicated and general purpose technologies, and it's also very fragmented in terms of downstream applications. And in this slide and the next two slides, I'm giving you examples exactly of this. So compare these two patterns. The first one is a very dedicated technology. Maintaining virus detection software, a method of managing a virus signature database associated with an antivirus application, both of which are resident in memory of a mobile wireless. This is a software security technology that a mobile wireless company produced. Why? I'm a mobile wireless company. I need a security technology. What do? I produce a technology that fits perfectly mobile wireless devices, because that's what I need. I am the producer who produces its own technology. And this is the patent. This is a patent by Certicom. Certicom is one of the leading software security companies of the world. What is this patent about? For me, it's completely ununderstandable. An elliptic curve encryption system represents coordinates of a point on the curve as a vector of binary digits in a normal basis representation in f dot sub dot 2 dot SPSB dot m. To me, it's dark. Okay? Now, the only thing I understand from the fact that I don't understand is that what is this? It's a method. This is a method for generating security algorithms. It's not a security algorithm, it's a method. And they devise some ways with elliptic curves to produce security software. Why have they developed such a generic thing? Because what they do is they sell it to everyone. You need security for banks? Adapt this. You need security for cars? Adapt this. You need security for buildings? Adapt this. You need security for whatever? You just adapt this method. You see the key difference here. The producer of mobile wireless only think about mobile wireless. The producer who doesn't have a sector downstream, he has to sell the technology, think of something, and the mindset is, let me think of something that is useful across. And so necessarily they move up on a more general device, which is exactly this. If you are a mobile wireless, this is what you produce. But if you are Certicom, this is what you want to produce. And this is what makes the size of the market large if you sell technology rather than products. If you sell mobile wireless, you think, how many people are going to buy an iPhone? But if you sell the technology, you think, how many applications I can find of my elliptic curve method? So this was the GPT in software security. This is the rise of markets in software security, product markets. At the beginning, it was antivirus. Over time, you see, it became lots of different markets. That's why Certicom is thinking about the general product. Because in the end, they have so many different applications that they can only think of something that is abstract enough to embrace all these applications. And that's the company strategy here. As a matter of fact, this is the industry started in early 2000. This is data from roughly mid-2000. As a matter of fact, what do you see in this industry? 50%, 56% of the revenues come from revenue shares. 28% from services, and 16% from licensing the algorithm. If you go to the Certicom website, you will see. They say, we have an elliptic method, and we license the method to whoever wants to apply the method to whatever product they need. And that's the way entrepreneurs that sell technology instead of products think. Laser business, same story. I'm not going to go into the details, but in the laser industry, same story. The lasers can have different applications in terms of markets, and that's exactly what companies do. They think, okay, can my laser be useful in manufacturing and in medical devices? That's the way they think. So if my laser is too dedicated to manufacturing, let me see what is the basic principle, because I also want to cater the medical device industry. Okay? And that's the way these people think. I want to give you this final example because it's the most beautiful one. This is a great example. Now, to give you the setting for this example, I will again try to go very briefly in a long series of time. And this is really what nails down what I want to say. We all drive a car, and we all know that car, at least largely so far, needs gasoline. The problem at the beginning of the 20th century was that the oil was too heavy to be produced, to become light enough to be used as gasoline for cars. So many companies really were making big efforts into creating light hydrocarbons from heavy hydrocarbons in order to produce something that would work for cars. Most of the solutions at the time came from Standard Oil, the biggest company of the era. And Standard Oil had a technology to refine heavy oils to become light oils. What was the problem with the Standard Oil process? The problem was this, that in the US at the time, there was oil everywhere. There was oil in many areas. Unfortunately, this oil had very different grades and quality. So the oil that you could find in one area of Texas had a different grade and quality than the oil that you could find in another area of Texas, or in whatever other parts of the US you could find oil. So Standard Oil had a dedicated technology. There was a good technology for, say, oil with a higher level, heavier kind of oil. There was a completely different technology from a kind of oil with a completely different set of characteristics, and so on and so forth. Then, and here is the interesting part of the story, two people, father and son, came up. The father, I don't remember the first name of the father, but it could have been Paul Dubs. So Paul Dubs created this company, Universal Oil Product. Interestingly, he is not famous for Universal Oil Product, which is what the son becomes famous for. He's more famous for the fact that he named his son Carbon Petroleum. And so Carbon Petroleum Dubs, otherwise known as CP Dubs, is the person to whom, I don't know whether we can say we need to be thankful, is the guy who enabled us to use gasoline in cars, because he created the Dubs process, which even today is one of the key processes for refining oil to produce gasoline. So CP Dubs continued this company, Universal Oil Product, but here is the interesting story. The value of the Dubs process, this is 1910, okay? The value of the Dubs process, and CP Dubs is a technology entrepreneur, someone who, as we'll see, sells the technology. The value of the Dubs process was twofold. It worked continuously without stopping production. And it produced gasoline from either high quality feedstocks or from low quality black oil. With the Dubs process, UOP, Universal Oil Product, could live up to the universal in its name by cleanly cracking any oil regardless of coke formation quantities. So far, so good. This is a GPT, okay? He had in mind a GPT, okay? This is what he had in mind. I need a technology useful for all types of oil. But then what about the company strategy? And here is the company strategy. Rather than vertically integrate forward into refining, I don't want to become an oil refiner. There are many oil refining companies out there. UOP licensed its technology to the immediate local refiners, helping them specialize it to their particular feedstocks. They did exactly what Echelon was doing, exactly what Certicom is doing, exactly what you name the biotech company today that is working in this market. And interestingly, 1910, 1990, not much in the middle. Why? Because in the middle, they were all like the mobile wireless. Once these guys became salaried employees of companies that were producing phones, they should not think in this way. They should think about the technology for the phone, not a technology for all the oil refiners. You should think about a technology for that particular black oil that I am selling in the market. And that's the big difference. 1910, like 1990, like in year 2000. Okay, why don't we see more of this? Now that we have seen, you see, this is why we see them, okay? This is why, and by the way, this is also interesting, just as a final remark on this. It's again the engineering sciences behind. 19th century, big development of the sciences. The sciences enable you to think in general and abstract terms. 20th century, lots of engineering, lots of trial and error. So no longer sciences, I'm making extreme cases, but more trial. The 2000, again, the sciences again, which is what enables you to think in general terms. So why don't we see more of them? Well, there is a key reason. 88% of the patents, at least I think this is the European Patent Office, but I think it's true of the US Patent Office, 88% of the patents are held by companies with 250 employees or more. So I would say that 3/4 of the patents are still today patents assigned to large firms. And large firms do not license. Even if they have technology that is sitting there, they do not license. Now, they claim that they do, because otherwise they confiscate their patents. Governments come and go. But let me put it this way. This is the best data that we have. This was a survey of European patents. What we find is that large firms are willing to license 16% of their patents. Small firms are willing to license 37% of their patents on average. Okay, so clearly a much larger share. Even more interestingly, large firms license 9% of their patents. Small firms license 26% of their patents. What does it mean? Not only large firms license a smaller share of their patents compared to small firms, are willing to. But it turns out that they license slightly more than 50% of the patents that they would like to license. Small firms license nearly 2/3. So not only large firms license few patents, are willing to license fewer patents, but how many do they actually license? An even smaller share compared to small firms. Why? for many reasons. Maybe they don't care enough. As small firms really makes an effort to license the patents because that's the core business. And large firms, they are selling the mobile wireless. Why should I also sell the technology? Maybe you don't buy the technology from a large firm who can threaten you in the product market. So for example, would you buy a technology from a leading company that could easily become a producer in your product market? But this is the fact. So what is the fact? Why are these markets tapering off probably? Because we have reached the limit. The small firms sell, but how many innovations do they have? 12% of the patents. We may have topped that limit probably. Probably small firms are licensing as much as they can. But till you see an increase in licensing by the large firms, these markets are not going to thrive, are not going to grow any longer. Now, I'm putting no value judgment on this. It could very well be that society is much better off with large firms not licensing. I'm just posing it to you as a fact. Whilst the market for product expands because of the large firms, the markets for technology is limited till the large firms start licensing their technology. We have evidence that some large firms have started to license their technology. IBM, Dow Chemical, Boeing, Motorola, Xerox, Procter & Gamble. What do they do? Interestingly, they create a centralized licensing unit. When large firms decide to license, IBM is the most obvious case. IBM today has become a service company and largely producing services of various kinds, including technology services. But again, this is the limitation here. This is where markets for technology are really tapering off. Till the large firms change their organizational structure to license the technology, we are less likely to see these markets. Why do we care? And I'm nearly going to the end of this. We care for one obvious reason, which is what Adam Smith was saying. Why there is economic growth? Because there is specialization and division of labor. Okay? I know how to do something, Nero knows how to do something else, and we exchange. This is the basis of economic growth. Okay? And if in technology there's no market, we cannot have economic growth. Because with no market for technology, suppose that I say, hey, I would like to have this great technology of mobile wireless. You better be good at develop your software security product. So you need to have great marketing guys and great technology guys, all in the same company. Or suppose that you say, hey, I have a great technology for mobile wireless. You better have the heavy downstream assets to sell the phone, because with the technology itself, there's nothing you can do. So without a market, you have to be what the Japanese call an all-around company. You need to encompass all the structures, from the technology to the final product. With markets for technology, you may not be the best one to make the technology. Fair enough. There will be someone else who can serve you with the technology. You may not be the best one to commercialize your technology, a product embodying the technology that you're able to produce. Fair enough. There could be someone who buys your technology. So you have more options and there is more innovation. Interestingly, let me give you this example. This process underlies a very fundamental process of economic growth. Let me give you this example. In the chemical industry, we know that the first world, particularly US and Germany, developed the most significant chemical industry of the world. And chemicals, by the way, 25% of the things that we see around are chemical-based. Okay, so this is a big, heavy industry. Interestingly, this industry spun off another industry called the specialized engineering firms. These are firms that actually engineer the chemical processes, essentially make the technology for producing chemical products. These were really sellers of the technology to whom? To the new chemical companies in the developing world. So what is the story of growth here? These companies could have never made it if they had to produce their own technology. They could only make it because these guys were offering the technology at marginal cost rather than average cost. And this is the essence of economic growth based on division of labor, and particularly based on the division of labor of the technology. To give you another example, the Italian textile industry It's one of the leading industries of the world. Because it is one of the leading industries of the world, it spun off a highly sophisticated industry of machine tool production in textile. Lots of knowledge, lots of technology in the processing of textile. Now, these Italian machine tool producers, what do? They sell their technologies to the Turkish firms, to firms in many parts of the world, which then compete with Italian textile producers. This is the essence of growth. Not good for the firms, probably good for society. And that's why we should care. Because the rise of technology markets, it's a potential for economic growth. This is just from my mentor at Stanford, Nate Rosenberg. In the 19th century, this is the machine tool industry. It gave rise to a series of different industries because they were using the same technology. Again, a general purpose technology. And this is what could happen. This is the next to the last slide. Carlos Serrano from Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona has actually estimated the gains from trade in technology markets. He has actually estimated how much value you have if you could create a market for selling technologies. His main finding is this. 23% of patents are traded at least once. The value of traded patents is 3 times a regular patent. This is the average value of a traded patent. This is the average value of a patent. So it's 3 times more valuable. And then it shows that essentially the value, the gains from trading patents is highly skewed. What does it mean? 10% of the traded patents cover 70% of the total gains from trade in technology markets. 1%, 25%. So it means that 23% of the patents are traded, but most of the money are made by a tiny fraction of these patents. This is what this means. So this is telling you markets for technology exist, but are a bit risky. They are very useful, create division of labor, create lots of opportunities for economic growth. But you know, if I open a wine and cheese in Milan, I more or less make it. Okay? I could be good, more better, not that good, but more or less I make it. If I open a technology, a software production, a software for incentivizing people to go and buy wine and cheese and many other things in Milan, the likelihood that I succeed is much smaller. And the likelihood that by selling that technology I make money, it's smaller. But if I do, I can earn a lot of money. So it's a market with these characteristics. Unlike setting the wine and cheese, developing the technology for the wine and cheese, it's a really different business. So conclusions. I was reading Startup Nation in the plane, and at page 230, Senor and Singer says, where is our Nokia? They say literally, I'm really almost citing. Every Israeli is asking this question, where is our Nokia? Then he says, there is Teva Pharmaceuticals, whose capitalization is 1.5 Nokia, but fair enough. I say, still, where is our Nokia? The point I want to make is, do you need a Nokia? Does Israel have the comparative advantage in downstream commercialization on large scale? Because mind you, if you create Nokia, you have to do like in the 1920s. You take all these guys, you put them into a salaried position, okay? You pay them a salary, and you ask them, don't think about these elliptic curves that can cater everywhere. Think about my mobile wireless. This is what I need from you. Is it Israel's comparative advantage? Do you have people who are relatively better at developing a technology on a specific product that I'm telling you? Or are you relatively better at developing technology that could go anywhere? And the other question that you have to pose yourself, do you have a market, a domestic market, that is large enough to then make money by selling all this mobile wireless? Sure, you can sell all over the world, but like the American companies, in competition with the American companies, in competition with German companies, in competition with the rest of the world. For the US, it's different. Or for China, it's different. In China, they sell the mobile wireless in Beijing, 35 million people, and they have the market. So for them, paradoxically, the question is the opposite. Is it worth developing all these entrepreneurs in China, as opposed to getting some Israeli technologies and making them on a large scale? I don't have the answer to this question. I'm posing the question to you. But I'm just making one final point. I don't know how many of you tasted this incredibly good ice cream by Grom. Grom is an Italian company that developed a new way of doing ice creams. It's completely based on primary ingredients. You want the pistachio for the ice cream? The pistachio comes from Bronte in Sicily, where 2,000 years ago, people were producing pistachio nuts. You want, I don't know, the walnuts of a certain kind? They come from the Pantelleria Island, where 500 years they developed a method to produce these kind of things. Grom became very, very popular in Italy and also in the rest of the world. 2 months ago, it was sold to Unilever. All the Italian newspapers began, this is the Italian innovation that actually gets out. But think about it. That's exactly what should happen. What are Italians good at? They are good at making great ice creams. They are not good at selling ice cream all over the world. For that, you need Unilever. And as a matter of fact, Grom was not sold for free. Grom was sold for a fair amount of money, which is exactly the capital value of the idea that they created on a worldwide scale. And on this note, I thank you very much, and hope you get some questions. Yes?
I have two questions. First one, speaking of going to markets of technologies, I guess in the 90s, how do you explain what happened in the 90s? Does it have any connection to the end of the Cold War, for example? And the second question is, putting this theory of markets of technology, how do you explain the success of these all-around companies such as Apple and Google in some sort of way, which is going exactly the opposite of selling technology?
Good question. So, number one, okay, for the first part, I don't know how much you can relate the 1990s to the Cold War. I relate the 1990s explosion more to the sciences, in the sense that in the 1980s, and of course before then, you had two big scientific advances. In the life sciences, which is the whole chemical paradigm, you had the biological revolution. So we now know how to design, we have a much better idea about how to design molecules. So whatever you were producing earlier by just trial and error, now you can design. And then you have the software. I mean, you cannot underestimate the software revolution. Think about software is everywhere. Everything. I mean, if I have to suggest what to do, even today, I mean, you need software to create, I don't know, booking of airplanes or booking of restaurants. What is this? This is complete codification. So these two elements, I think these were the two main drivers of what happened in the 1990s that you could separate. On the other issue, I'm not advocating that you should, each and every, from a strategy point of view, that each and every company has to disintegrate. I am just suggesting that, I'm just suggesting two things. First, there are entrepreneurial opportunities from selling the technology rather than integrating downstream. And this is something that companies have started to realize, but let me tell you, it was not so obvious 20 years ago. Genentech was one of the first companies that could go downstream. Amgen was one of the first biotech companies to go downstream. But many biotech companies wanted to go downstream and they failed. So this is an opportunity. You can sell the technology rather than selling the product. The other point is, it is not true that the general trend, in any case, about whether large firms should sell their technology or not is still open and unclear. It's exactly what I said in the slide. Some companies are doing it. They are creating IP licensing departments and selling the technology. But it's completely unclear. You're right. It's completely unclear whether for them this is the right move or not.
My question is, why did it stop? I can understand why it rose again in the 1990s, but it's like we've been in a market for technology in the 19th century, and at some point, the 20th century, it has stopped. Why?
You mean back in the 1920s? Yeah. For one reason, because I think for two reasons. One is I think the science reached its limits. In the sense at that point, you had exploited all the sciences. What you needed was really trial and error, engineering. Now we don't know enough. We can just go through trial and error. To go through trial and error, you need big machines. And the capital assets to create the big machines could only be done in fairly large companies. I think this is the main reason why you then move to the other system.
And the regulators are trying to figure out what's the optimal size, if I've understood correctly, and especially in the European Union trying to fight. Do you think from this style of work you can understand what's the optimal size of society? When the regulators keep their noses out?
For the market or? Yeah, I think this is a hard question also for a number of nuances and things. It's again related to the previous point, and I think that I really think that there is a division of labor based on comparative advantages. Let me put it this way to you. I really think that even the greatest technologies that some of these companies produce, like Cisco is another good example, they come from acquisition of these companies, which is another way to find a market for technology. So my sense is that to the extent that you create a very large company that actually integrates all the technological activities, which is not something that is happening because companies are not doing that. They are actually tapping the external sources now more in the past. Then this is a good thing. You need the large companies for the commercialization. But to the extent that these companies will actually reduce the potential entrepreneurship that comes from these technology markets, I think this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. But these large companies are not really doing that. It's a more sophisticated thing. What they are doing is they are trying to make captive suppliers. So they are creating standards so that these companies only cater to them rather than to other companies. This is the more intriguing aspect from a regulatory mechanism point of view.
And the cycle of the markets for technology, so up to the 1920s and then again from the 90s.
Yes.
That correlates with the cycles in globalization. So the first era of globalization until World War I, and then the re-emergence of globalization in the 90s. And it also correlates with the size of stock markets, like, Rajan Zingale's great
yes.
this kind of argument. So you had countries, including in continental Europe, with thriving stock markets, and then it was suppressed with the Great Depression and then the interwar period and so on. So I'm puzzled by your answer to, I don't know who was the gentleman who asked it. It may have to do with technology, but it is so strongly correlated with other powerful forces that I doubt it's only.
No, I think you have a point. I never thought about this, but yes, you're right. And also, it's also in the globalization, apart from the finance, another potential is the globalization meant a lot of exchange of knowledge, not just finance, you see? Exactly. No, I think this is true. Again, as I said, the causes for this are I think the sciences played a role, definitely. But you're right, there could very well be also a cycle story of this kind. Yeah, globalization and exchange of that sort. For example, just to give you an example which resonates with what you are saying, a lot of the engineering companies in chemicals actually could also thrive because of the lots of exchange of technology with the German companies, which were very integrated. I mean, closure of the wall, lots of the technology came in, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Yes?
In the 1990s, you admitted there was a large growth in technologies. And I would put to you maybe that also one of the drivers for that was that the markets, the high-tech market, became a problem. The benchmark for valuations of companies was more what technologies they had available rather than their sales, and that was a strong generator of creating new technology and patents.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. There was a lot of concomitant factors, and including the greatest attention to technology. So part of the rise of the market was also because people became aware that this was a potential market, that you could actually sell the patents and you could evaluate companies based on the technology that you have. Actually, there is very recent research that is showing exactly what you are saying. They are showing that when you are a young companies and you have more patents, you get a better evaluation, not because these patents have potential, but because these patents tell that there's actually good stuff in your company, even if you don't see the potential for the market. So,
one more point. My patent attorney tells me that like 80% of the scientists that approach her, there's prior art out there, and only 20% are patentable, and that is diminishing. It's diminishing because the amount of prior art increases over time. Whatever has ever been invented, okay, is prior art and is not patentable anymore. So it diminishes there are more and more opportunities, but it's much more difficult to patent.
This is I see what you're saying. This is this resonates with another trend. This is also all very recent dynamics that is also important. There's another trend which is very much related with what you're saying. Basically, what is happening is that lots of knowledge is becoming openly free. For example, there is a study at MIT by a young PhD student. He's actually showing that NASA has made available pictures of the Earth at the level of really small ground. The entire Earth in small squares, it's completely pictured. And so he shows that this has enabled companies looking for gold to improve their ability to find gold. So this is like this is knowledge made completely available for free, of which companies can benefit. And interestingly, he finds that this has benefited the smaller firms much more than the large firms. So the availability of knowledge for free is like the chemical companies in the developing countries. The availability of knowledge for free helps the poor rather than the rich, you see, in that respect, and creates a more competitive market. So another big area, it could very well be that a lot of these technology markets will no longer be markets, but come back to the old days in which knowledge is distributed for free. But it would have the same implication, you see. So these are very much open issues now.
Incidentally, there is an Israeli company that uses algorithms that help find gold, and it uses general purpose algorithms now to find different types of resources in the ground based on algorithms from those pictures. So it's a reversal back to the general purpose.
Right.
That is appropriable and licensed.
Right.
From an Israeli.
No, I think that the general picture that you will observe is you'll not find a one-way model. What I think I'm saying is that we have seen, especially in the 19th century inventors, they were largely relying on patents. Nowadays, you see a much more mixed model, in which you have examples like this. You see the knowledge for free. I have a PhD student at Bocconi. She actually shows that the weakening of IP rights in the United States in the 2000s has actually reduced the licensing by the small technology companies, but has not decreased the entry of these companies. So it's like these companies have found new ways to sell technologies, maybe through services or things like that, in a different fashion.
Thank you for this fascinating lecture. Actually, I had a question that very much relates to this. So I know you tried to avoid making welfare statements, right?
Right.
I'm going to take it one step backward and ask, do we have any evidence if markets for technology affect the level of innovation? Not whether or not there's externalities. Because you can see, with markets for products, if you set a price and it's high, like you internalize production, set a salary high, no matter what I produce, you can see how that would create more innovation than what markets might. So do we have any evidence?
The only paper I know, it's a paper by Ronnie Chatterjee and Kira Fabrizio, and they actually show the following. They show the following thing. Let me just spend 1 minute to give you exactly what they did. They show the following thing. They have medical device companies, and these medical device companies develop a lot of their technologies by, these are companies that develop technology and that sell the technologies to other companies. They develop a lot of them through relationship with doctors. No? They talk to the doctors and so on and so forth. It turns out that there is a nice experiment from an economic point of view, even not the ideal story from a societal point of view. Essentially, some of these doctors, there was some issue because they were also paid to get the prescriptions and so on and so forth. So the courts actually banned a group of companies from talking to the doctors for like 10 years or 5 years, I don't remember. They actually show that other things being equal, those companies innovate less than the companies who were still free to talk to the doctors. So I take this statement as suggesting that, yes, if you cut the market for technology, you reduce the rate of innovation. This is what this study would suggest.
Alfonso, I wish to thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thought-provoking lecture.
Thank you very much.
This is just a small token of appreciation from us.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for being with us, and see you in the next Asper talk.